Stella Hayes had already spent the morning teaching a brewer's twin daughters their sums, and by the time she climbed the narrow stairs to her rooms above the cooper's yard, the smell of pitch and wet timber had settled into her sleeves, as if it belonged there. She set her carpet-bag on the chair with the broken cane seat, took off her gloves, and went directly to the small ledger by the window where she kept the week's figures in a hand, as precise as her father's had been. Lamp oil, half paid. Bread, paid. Coal deferred until Friday. Thread, bought in remnant lengths. She lifted the little purse beside the book, tipped its contents onto the table, and separated shillings from sixpences in 2 neat lines. Across the room, Rowan Vale sat with his cuffs turned inside out, needle in his fingers, his coat on the back of the chair to keep lint from the cloth. He did not ask what she had earned. She did not ask what he had not. The knock at the door came in 3 sharp taps that carried the authority of a larger house. Rowan looked up once. Stella had already crossed the room. A footman in Hayes livery stood on the landing with a folded note on a silver tray that had no business near a cooper's yard. He did not meet her eyes when he spoke. "From Mrs. Hayes, ma'am." "Thank you," Stella said. He hesitated as if waiting for some performance of shame, then gave up and descended the stairs. She closed the door, turned the note over and broke the wafer seal with her thumb. The paper was heavy, the ink immaculate, the message short enough to memorize in one glance. Return home, apologize, and the allowance resumes. No greeting, no signature beyond the neat B at the bottom. The same B that had arrived every month for 2 years, every month with the same terms, as though Stella were a tenant who had neglected a lease, rather than a daughter whose father's trust had been tied to her mother's consent. For a moment her fingers held the page too tightly and the edge cut into the skin by her nail. She laid it flat on the ledger before the paper could tremble. Rowan did not rise. Another instruction. "Another invitation," she said, "to kneel." His mouth shifted, almost a smile and not one. "Will you attend?" She folded the note once, then again, each crease exact. No. That was the whole of it. She put the letter beneath the ledger with the others and moved to the stove to set the kettle, her motions brisk and ordinary, though the old pressure had begun at the base of her throat, the one she recognized from childhood dinners where her mother had corrected posture, diction, appetite, and silence with equal coolness. In the yard below, Cooper's hammers struck iron hoops into place, ringing through timber and stone in patient blows. The noise steadied her. By evening, the pressure had found its form. Mr. Clegg, who supplied paper and lamp oil to half the lane, came up the stairs smelling of rain and ink, his hat in his hands, and apology already in his face. Stella invited him in before he could speak, because embarrassment had to be handled quickly, or it spread. "I did not wish to trouble you, Mrs. Vale," he said, keeping his eyes on the ledger and not on the room. "But I received a communication this afternoon from your family's townhouse. I was advised that any extension of credit to this address would be regarded as my own risk and unsupported by previous guarantees." Rowan rose then, but Stella lifted one hand and he went still. "How much is outstanding?" she asked. £2, 4 shillings. She opened the purse, counted what was there and added the coin she had set aside for coal. £1.11. I can bring you the remainder by Thursday. Mr. Clegg looked stricken. "Mrs. Vale, there is no urgency. I should not have come tonight." "You should have come," she said. "You have accounts to keep." She set the coins into his palm one by one until the weight made his fingers close. When he had gone, she latched the door and rested her hand for one breath on the wood. Her pulse beat against it hard and even. Rowan moved to the table and touched the folded note with one fingertip. This is deliberate. Yes. Do you wish me to call on Mrs. Hayes? No. She turned back toward him, and her voice did not rise. I do not need you to ask mercy where none exists. He inclined his head once, accepting the refusal as final. Then he carried the kettle to the table and poured with the care of a host in a larger house than this one. Outside, the yard lamps lit and darkened through the slats as men crossed between sheds. Stella drank tea, made too weak to waste leaves, and sat with her account book open, while Rowan repaired a second seam and said nothing that would force gratitude from her. It was near midnight when she took the old packet from the drawer, the one bound in faded blue ribbon. Her father's hand on legal copies, her mother's countersignature, the trust clauses she had read until she could recite them with closed eyes. Disbursement at widow's discretion until daughter's marriage, provided the marriage be approved by guardian. Approved. A word made of iron. She had once believed her mother's severity to be a method, not a creed, that discipline, even harsh discipline, might still include a daughter's welfare. That belief had ended in the library at Hayes' house 2 years earlier, when she stood with a tea tray outside the half-closed door and listened to voices she had been expected not to hear. The solicitor spoke first, old Mr. Penlow, precise and uncomfortable. Mrs. Hayes, Lord Denham has made his intentions known, but Miss Hayes has not accepted an introduction. A pause, the soft click of her mother setting down porcelain. You will arrange it, Beatrice Hayes said. Madam, Miss Hayes is of age to— You will arrange it, her mother repeated, flat as a table edge. Insurance secures inheritance. Denham understands that. She does not need to. Stella remembered exactly how the tray handle had bitten her palm through the napkin, the silver tray's rim cold against her wrist, the scent of bergamot rising from cups she had poured herself. She had not dropped anything. She had not entered. She had stood still until her pulse slowed enough to trust her hands, then carried the tea to the breakfast room instead and set it down before the portrait of her father that hung above the sideboard, his painted eyes directed towards the window, as though he had expected light to arrive from outside and not from his own house. That evening her mother had sent for her. Beatrice sat at the escritoire in pearl grey silk, the lamps arranged so that no shadow touched her face. You will attend Denham's supper on Thursday. Stella remained by the door. I will not. Beatrice lifted her gaze from the page she was signing, mildly surprised by tone rather than meaning. You mistake your leverage. I do not possess any. Then do not perform refusal as principle. You are not built for discomfort. Stella had looked at the cabinets full of china that no one used, the polished floor reflecting lamplight, the heavy curtains that muffled even carriage wheels. She had grown up in those rooms. She had known where every key was kept, what each servant feared, which guests lied before the first course. Her mother's world ran on surfaces so perfect they were mistaken for law. You will marry where I direct, Beatrice said, or you will discover what your convictions buy. Stella had bowed because no answer offered dignity to either of them. As you wish, mother. She left that room, went upstairs and packed one carpet bag. 3 dresses, 2 books, her father's penknife, the ring with a chipped garnet she never wore. She did not pack tears because they had no use. At the servants' stairs, Martha, the nursery maid who had become housekeeper by endurance alone, saw the bag and started to speak. Stella touched her wrist. Do not help me. Do not stop me. Martha swallowed and nodded. Take bread. Stella took bread. When she reached the front hall, the clock had just struck 6. No carriage had been called. No chaperone had been summoned. She opened the door herself and stepped into a London evening that smelled of coal smoke, horse leather and river damp, each scent brighter than the rooms she had left. At St. Jude's, where she had gone because churches stayed open longer than parlours, and no one questioned a woman who sat in a pew with gloved hands folded. A man at the side door had held it for her without looking past her shoulder to ask whom she belonged to. He wore a coat brushed thin at the elbows. His boots were clean but old. His eyes were dark, steady, and observant in the manner of men who had spent too long making themselves unobtrusive. "Madam," he had said, and stepped aside. That was all at first. Not rescue, not fate. A door opened instead of closed. Now, 2 years later, Stella sat above the cooper's yard with her mother's latest note beneath her ledger and her father's clauses spread before her, and she understood with a clarity that no longer frightened her that the injustice had never been hunger, or work, or narrow rooms. It had been ownership spoken in the language of duty. It had been the quiet certainty that her life could be arranged like furniture and called protection. Across the table, Rowan finished mending his cuff and knotted the thread. Will they press harder? Yes. He put the cuff down, met her eyes, and asked only, "What do you require?" She closed the packet of truss papers and tied the ribbon once around it. "Time," she said, "and exact accounts." His answer came without flourish. "You have both." In the yard below, the last hammer fell silent, and the night settled over timber, brick, and iron, while Stella turned to a clean page in her ledger and began another line. The nib scratched once, twice, then steadied as Stella entered Thursday's projected expenses beside the figures already dry on the page. Rowan shifted his chair nearer the lamp, not near enough to crowd her, and turned the ledger so the light struck the ruled columns cleanly. "You have undercounted the coal by 3 shillings, he said. She did not look up. "I have postponed the top crate. The top crate lasts through rain. We are not in rain." His hand rested near the margin, broad-knuckled, calloused where a pen should have left only a small writer's ridge. "Then we are in risk." At that, she raised her eyes. His were dark as wet earth, watchful and without demand. He was still in shirt-sleeves, cuff newly mended, the thread invisible unless the fabric caught the light. He had owned one good coat for as long as she had known him, and he brushed it each night as though dignity lived in nap. She had seen men with fortunes carry themselves less carefully. "I will move it," she said, and drew a line through the number with a single stroke. "Now, it is in prudence." His mouth shifted very slightly. "I stand corrected." When the page was closed and the ribbon tied around the month's receipts, he rose to bank the stove, and she cleared the teacups, each movement practiced enough that they no longer discussed which task belonged to whom. That had been true from the first week. No speeches, no terms spoken aloud, only work divided by use. In the narrow sink, she rinsed porcelain gone thin at the rim, listening to the yard settle beneath them. Wheel rims stacked, barrels rolled into place, men calling goodnight through timber dark with pitch. Their room held little that could not be carried by 2 hands. A bedstead, 2 chairs, one failing, a trunk with winter woolens folded in paper. Her father's legal packet in the drawer, blue ribbon worn pale at the knot. Oh. She set the cups upside down to dry and felt Rowan stop behind her before he spoke. "Stella," she turned. "I can sell the watch," he said. "It would clear Clegg and Cole both." She had seen the watch only twice, silver dull with age, face hairline cracked at the 6, chain repaired with a plain iron link. He kept it wrapped in cloth under the shirts in his trunk, never worn, never displayed, as if its value was not money, but memory. No, it is practical. It is not for sale. A faint line appeared beside his mouth, not displeasure exactly, something more like surprise at being denied with such certainty. "You do not know what it is." "You do." The line eased. He inclined his head, accepting the verdict in silence as he accepted most things she made final. Then he lifted the lamp glass, pinched the wick low, and the room softened into amber shadow and stove glow. She folded her dress over the chair, lay down with her hair braided loose over one shoulder, and listened to him move, once, twice, then still. In the dark, she tracked the coming day by tasks. Lesson books wrapped in cloth, hems to finish for Mrs. Peel on Little Anchor Lane, market before noon to catch lower fish prices, church steps by 3 if the weather held, and if she could leave the sewing basket early. Her life had become exact, because exactness was cheaper than surprise. At dawn, the cooper's first hammer struck iron and woke the room as reliably as any clock. She dressed in grey wool gone smooth at elbow and cuff, pinned collar and cuffs white, and scraped yesterday's wax strips from the table before setting out slates and the twins' arithmetic copybook. Rowan was already at the basin shaving with the blade she sharpened against leather each Sunday. He worked in short, efficient motions and nicked his jaw only once. "You are at the key today?" she asked. "South office first, then river counts." River counts. Clerks did not usually come home with mud halfway to the knee from river counts, but she only said, "I will keep supper warm if you are delayed." "Do not wait hungry." "I did not say I would wait." That drew it, the rare smile that transformed him from reserved to almost boyish for a heartbeat before composure returned. "No, you did not." The brewer's daughters arrived with wet ribbons and inky fingers, and sat at her table smelling faintly of yeast and sugar. Stella taught as she did all things, briskly, without softening standards to purchase affection. 8 times 7, both girls together. If a cask held 9 gallons and half were sold by noon, how much remained? She corrected their sums, pressed bread into their hands when one admitted she had skipped breakfast, and sent them back down the lane with grammar copied and boots rebuttoned. Mrs. Brewer paid in coins wrapped in paper, and 1 heel of cheese she pretended was accidental. By the 2nd week of October, Stella had learned which shopkeepers would meet her eyes, and which would study the counter when Heir's livery passed outside. At the fishmonger's, Mr. Pike weighed sprats with his thumb absent-mindedly touching the scale until she looked at him, and he removed it without apology. At the baker's, a woman in violet silk turned to examine rolls she did not intend to buy and said to her companion, in a tone pitched for hearing, "That is her, the one who married beneath herself and calls it principle." Stella selected yesterday's bread, less dear by half, and asked the price as if she had heard nothing. She could feel the woman's glance touch her sleeve, her hem, her plain bonnet, with its single faded ribbon. Social labels, a small mean currency that spent well in public. Outside the apothecary, she met Mr. Clegg, descending his step with account sheets tucked under his arm. He flushed when he saw her, as though debt were indecent to mention in daylight. "Mrs. Vale, I did not expect—" "You expected Thursday," she said, and placed wrapped coins in his hand. 8 shillings. "Mrs. Vale, I can wait." "You have waited." His face tightened with something like gratitude and shame tangled together. "Your mother's clerk called again this morning. He asked whether your household still purchased lamp oil. I told him nothing." She kept her voice even. "That was wise." He left his card. She accepted the card because refusing would only force him to hold it longer. Hayes and Penlow solicitors, embossed in black, Mr. Edwin Maris beneath. Beatrice did not write twice in 1 week unless she intended motion. Stella tucked the card into her glove and moved on. In Little Anchor Lane, Mrs. Peel the seamstress worked in a back room lit by one high window and two stubbed candles. Her apprentices bent over shirt fronts in a silence broken only by scissors and occasional coughs. Stella delivered finished hems and took in mending that paid by piece, not hour. Her fingers were faster than most, her stitches small and disciplined, and still the money barely bridged month to month. She did not complain, because complaint altered nothing measurable. At midday she carried her basket toward the quay to meet Rowan for 10 minutes and share cold pie on a warehouse step, as they did when his office lay near enough. The street broadened toward river traffic, air thick with tar, salt, and horse sweat, cartwheels cutting ruts through old mud. Men moved bales and barrels with the reflexive coordination of long practice. Porters shouted numbers, names, dock marks. Two retired officers in worn blue coats stood near a customs post, with canes tucked under their arms, speaking quietly. Rowan stepped from a side alley before she reached the warehouse gate, as though he had seen her sooner than she had seen him. His coat was brushed, collar straight, boots polished. At the edge of one heel, fresh mud clung in a crescent as if he had crossed untreated ground, not paving stones. "You should not be here alone at this hour," he said. "It is noon, not midnight." Still. She offered him the wrapped pie. "Then stand where you can disapprove and eat." He took the parcel, and for 3 bites they spoke only of practical things. Mrs. Brewer's twins had mastered long division. Clegg had been paid another portion. Coal must be bought this week and no argument tolerated. A groom passed leading 2 bay horses and slowed when he saw Rowan. "Sir," the man said with an instinctive respect that landed a shade too formal for clerks and strangers. Rowan gave the smallest nod, not dismissive, not familiar. The groom moved on at once. Stella set her basket down. "You know him?" "From errands." "Errands involve horses now." Today they did. He spoke without hesitation, yet she watched him fold the pie paper with military neatness before returning it to her basket, edges aligned exactly. Nearby, one of the retired officers glanced over, straightened by habit, and touched 2 fingers to the brim of his hat toward Rowan in a gesture too precise to be accidental. Rowan acknowledged it with a tilt of the head and nothing more. The officer returned to his companion and did not look back. Stella felt curiosity rise, then set it down where she set so many things that had no room in the account book. Men met men in cities. Respect happened for reasons invisible from the pavement. Bread still cost what it cost. Rent still came due on Mondays. She closed the basket and stood. "I must be at street, Jude's by 3. I will walk you to Cheapside. That would add time to your river counts. I have enough." They moved through the crowd without touching, close enough that his shoulder occasionally shielded her from carts edging too near the curb. At the cross street he stopped, scanned the flow once, and let her pass ahead where the paving narrowed. She noticed, not for the first time, that men stepped aside for him before they seemed aware they had decided to do so. At St. Jude's, the church door stood open against the afternoon chill, stone steps damp and worn at the middle by decades of feet. A thin man in a porter's coat sat 2 steps down from the entrance, with his ankle wrapped in linen, already dark at the edge. He held his cap in both hands and looked nowhere in particular, as if avoiding notice had become habit. Stella paused, set down her sewing basket, and knelt without ceremony. "You should not sit in this draught with that bandage," she said. "You will lose the use of it for a week." He tried to draw his leg back. "Ma'am, it is nothing." "It is swelling through the cloth. Nothing does not swell." From her basket she drew the small flask of clean water she carried for long afternoons, and the strip of linen she used to wrap chalk and needles apart. She loosened the old wrap, rinsed mud from the skin with careful hands, and bound the ankle again, firm but not tight. The man watched her as if uncertain which rule she had broken. "I cannot pay you," he said. "This is not for sale." He swallowed. "Bless you, then." She rose, wiped her hands on her plain handkerchief, and lifted the basket. Across the lane, beside a dark carriage she had not noticed arrive, a broad-shouldered older man in a steward's coat stood half-shadowed by the wheel, his gaze fixed not on the church, but on her. When he saw that she had seen him, he touched 2 fingers to his hat in impeccable household courtesy, then stepped up behind the carriage door and spoke to someone inside too softly for words to carry. Rowan had not said he would follow her to St. Jude's. She told herself the man belonged to someone else, some lady at prayer, some merchant's household passing by. Even so, as she climbed the church steps, the back of her neck cooled beneath her collar, not with fear, but with the distinct sensation of entering a room where an unseen conversation had already begun. She mounted the last step and entered the nave with her basket against her hip. The cool stone smell of old lime wash and extinguished candles settling around her as the heavy door eased shut behind her. St. Jude's held afternoon light the way some people held silence, without effort, without apology. It lay in pale strips across pewbacks worn smooth by generations of hands. Stella moved to the side aisle where parish mending was kept in 2 wicker hampers and set down the shirts she had promised Mrs. Ellery, the verger's wife, by Thursday. Mrs. Ellery looked up from a pile of altar linen and blinked at her over steel-rimmed spectacles. "Mrs. Vale, those cuffs are finer than needed." "They will last longer," Stella said. "That is not always how charity accounts are managed." "No," Stella said, and folded the next cloth. "It should be." Mrs. Ellery watched her for a beat, then gave a short nod that passed for approval in women who had no leisure for sentiment. "The porter outside is one of Mr. Dace's men from the Riverside sheds. Bad step off a cart, proud as a bishop and twice as stubborn. He needs rest, not pride. Tell him I have." Stella finished stacking the repaired linen, checked the donation box tally against the written slip beside it, and found the numbers short by 2 pence, where they had been short the week before. She left 1 coin from her own purse and marked the adjustment in neat script in the parish book. No witness stood over her shoulder. She did it because entries should be honest. When she crossed back through the nave, she paused at the end of a pew and bowed her head only long enough to let her breath settle. The world outside pressed and calculated and demanded. Here the stillness had rules that did not bend for pedigree. She rose before the stillness turned into indulgence and went to the door. The carriage remained across the lane, black lacquer dulled by dust, horses quiet under patient hands. The broad-shouldered steward stood where she had last seen him, 1 gloved hand on the open door, his face turned slightly away in professional discretion. But Rowan was there now on the paving stones between carriage and church steps, speaking with the injured porter she had bandaged. The porter held a folded packet of paper and looked like a man resisting gratitude, because gratitude implied dependence. Rowan said something she could not hear. The porter gave 1 rigid shake of his head. Rowan's answer came low, brief, final. The porter accepted the packet. Then Rowan turned and saw her. His expression did not shift, not in any obvious way. Yet the guarded public reserve that sat on him in streets and offices loosened by a fraction as he stepped toward the stairs. "You remained longer than usual," he said. Mrs. Ellery had figures that required correction. Stella glanced once toward the carriage, then back to him. "And you appear to have found new errands." His gaze followed hers, then returned. "A household matter. Not mine." That was not an explanation, and he knew it. She let it pass. The porter behind him touched his cap to Stella. "Ma'am, the wrapping holds." "I said it would." Rowan reached for her basket. "The left handle is splitting. May I?" She let him take it, surprised she had not noticed the frayed leather herself. He turned it once in his hands, thumb pressing the weak point, then set it on the low stone wall by the church rail, and drew a narrow strip of dark cord from his coat pocket. Not twine. Fine waxed cord, strong enough for tack or harness. He worked quickly, knotting and winding with the practiced economy of someone who had repaired more than cuff seams in his life. "Where did you find that?" she asked. "In a place where things must not break." He finished the binding, tested the handle's weight, and handed the basket back. Their fingers touched as she took it, a brief contact through wool gloves and cool air. His hand was warm. "Thank you," she said. "You paid the parish shortfall again." She stilled. "You read over my shoulder?" "I counted from the door." "That is a disagreeable habit." "It is useful." She should have rebuked him. Instead, she found herself almost smiling. "You are not invited to balance the church books." "I suspected as much." The steward by the carriage opened the door wider and waited. Rowan did not look toward him. For one suspended moment, Stella understood that the waiting was for Rowan, not for some unseen master inside. The thought arrived complete and inconvenient. She placed it, as she had placed all inconvenient things, in the quiet back room of her mind where necessities were not permitted to fray. He stepped down one stair with her as she began to descend. "Will you walk home directly?" "Through Cheapside first. Then I will go with you." "You are occupied." "Not beyond revision." They crossed the lane and turned toward the narrower streets where shop signs leaned over the paving, and late market sellers called out bruised fruit at half price. Rowan walked on the cart side, as he always did, without mentioning the choice. At the corner near the stationer's, a boy of about 12 stumbled from a doorway with a crate of folded paper and nearly collided with a brewer's dray. Rowan caught the crate before it fell, set it back into the boy's arms, and steadied the child with one hand at his shoulder. "Look first," he said. "Yes, sir." No impatience, no flourish. Only command carried in an even tone that expected obedience and received it. At the stationer's window, Stella paused over a tray of pen nibs she could not justify this week. Rowan stopped beside her. "You still use the broad points," he said. "They are cheaper. They blot in damp weather." "They are cheaper," she repeated. He inclined his head and moved on. At the next stall he bought nothing, only asked the cobbler's wife if her husband still took repair work after dusk. She said yes. Rowan thanked her, and they continued without speaking until they reached the lane above the cooper's yard. At their door he held out his hand. "Your key." She gave it to him, and he knelt on the top step, cleaned the lock with a narrow tool from his pocket, then worked a trace of oil into the key teeth before returning it. It was catching. It has been catching for weeks. "I know." She stared at him. "How?" "You turn it twice before it gives." He stood, and for the first time that day she laughed, low and unplanned, at the absurdity of being watched so carefully in matters so small. The sound startled her more than him. He looked at her as if committing the shape of it to memory. Inside she lit the lamp and found, beside the ledger, a new pen nib wrapped in plain brown paper. No note, no mark from the stationer. She turned it over once in her palm. When Rowan came in carrying coal scuttle and kindling, she set the packet down and said nothing. He said nothing. Later, while she copied the week's sums in clear columns, the nib moved over paper without catching once. By the last days of October, Thursday had become the one afternoon she could predict with a steadiness that did not depend on coin. Church steps, a shared walk when schedules allowed, the lane by the quay when they did not. Stella never named it routine, because routine could be taken away. She simply arrived. On one Thursday, she found Rowan already seated 3 steps below the church door, with a wrapped parcel on his knee and mud, dried pale on his boot edges, as if he had crossed a state ground rather than city paving. He rose when she reached him and held out the parcel. "Account paper," he said. "Rejected stock from South Office. The edges are irregular. It is sound." She untied the string and looked at the stack. Heavy cream sheets trimmed unevenly on one side. Good enough for lesson books and household records, both. "How much?" "Nothing." She retied the bundle. "Then I cannot accept it." "It was to be pulped." "Then the mill may have it." He waited. "Stella." She met his eyes. "I will pay." His mouth tightened, not offended, more like resigned respect. 3 shillings. "The whole bundle is worth 7. "3!" She opened her purse, counted out the coins and placed them in his hand. He closed his fingers around them without protest. "You bargain like a dockmaster." "I live above one." They went in together to leave mending with Mrs. Ellery, and when they came out a light rain had started, more mist than drops. Rowan unfolded an umbrella from the church stand, checked the ferrule, and held it so the shelter covered her shoulder and not his. Water darkened his coat along the outer sleeve. At the corner near the print shop, 2 gentlemen in military-cut coats halted as Rowan approached. Both were grey at temple and straight-backed despite canes. "Mr. Vale," one said. "Colonel Ashcombe," Rowan replied. The other inclined his head to Stella with formal courtesy. "Mrs. Vale." No one introduced anyone. No one asked questions. The men stepped aside first. After they had passed, Stella said, "Do all clerks know colonels?" "Only the unwise ones." "That is not an answer." "It is sufficient for rain." She ought to have pressed. She adjusted her grip on the paper bundle instead. "Very well." A week later, at the river lane near the bonded warehouses, she waited for him with a heel of bread and cheese wrapped in cloth, standing clear of wagon traffic where a cracked stone lion marked the corner post. A shout rose from the loading yard, then another, sharper with urgency. 2 men had a handcart angled badly on a slick plank, one wheel hanging over the side above the lower ramp. The crate on the cart had shifted and sat canted enough to tip. Before Stella could move, Rowan was already there. "Hold!" he called, and the word cut through yard noise like a bell strike. Men stopped. Even the shouting ceased. He stepped onto the plank, set one hand against the crate, and spoke in quick instructions. "Rope under, not over. You. Brace the wheel. You. Take the back weight on my count." His voice did not rise. It carried anyway. Now. The rope took strain, the wheel thudded back onto timber, and the crate settled true. No one cheered. They simply resumed breathing. The foreman, a wide man with tar on both sleeves, came forward. "Thank you, sir." Rowan wiped wet grit from his palm with his handkerchief. "Replace that plank before noon." "Yes, sir." He turned from the foreman and crossed back to Stella as if he had merely stepped aside to avoid a puddle. She handed him the bread without comment. He took it, eyes on her face for one unreadable second. "You disapprove." "I observe." "Of what?" She glanced toward the yard where men now moved faster, cleaner under new order. "You are obeyed quickly for a man no one should know." He broke bread, offered her half and said nothing. She took it. "I am not asking for confession, Rowan." "Good. I am asking whether any of this endangers our accounts." His answer came at once. "No." That was the question that mattered. She nodded. "Then we are finished with the subject." They ate on the stone step while river wind pushed cold through her shawl. A barge bell sounded twice. Across the lane, a clerk from customs hurried past, paused when he recognized Rowan, and gave a short bow before moving on. Stella kept her eyes on the ledger page in her mind. Rent, Monday, coal Tuesday. Mr. Clegg's final balance by month's end, ink if lessons held. Facts, always facts. Yet when Rowan rose and, without speaking, wrapped the end of her shawl more securely at her throat against the wind, his fingers careful not to brush skin, the practical world widened by a fraction she could not account for. That evening, as lamps came on, one by one above the cooper's yard, and the smell of fresh hooped barrels rose through the floorboards, she found the cobbler had left her boots outside their door, with new soles stitched in tight waxed thread. No bill lay with them. Inside, on the table beside the ledger, 3 shillings and 4pence sat in a straight line, exact change, weighted by her brass thimble so the draught from the window could not shift a coin. Rowan looked up from the stove when she entered, his expression composed. "Your boots were unsafe," he said. She set the coins back beside him, then charged the household. He pushed 1 shilling toward her. "Half." "Half," she agreed. Neither mentioned the thimble or the care of the neat line, or the way his rare smile returned when she moved the single coin into her purse and opened the ledger to a clean page, as if this, too, could be entered and balanced. She moved the single shilling into the expense column, wrote cobbler half share, and blotted the line with the corner of scrap paper before the ink could feather. Rowan watched the entry, not the coin, then returned his attention to the stove as if the matter had been adjudicated in a proper court and required no appeal. A second knock came while she was still closing the ledger. Not the sharp entitlement of Hay's livery this time, not Mr. Clegg's apologetic rhythm. 2 hesitant taps, then 1, as if the hand on the other side had reconsidered and knocked anyway. Stella opened the door to find the porter from St. Jude's, cap in both hands, ankle-bound in the linen she had wrapped 3 days earlier. He stood with his weight too carefully balanced, a man trying to appear recovered for the sake of pride. "Mrs. Vale," he said, "beg pardon for the hour. You are not a disturbance. Come in out of the draught." He did not cross the threshold. "No, ma'am, I only came to return this." He held out the clean strip of linen, folded square. "And to say Mr. Dace has 4 men laid up now, not 1. There was a break on the lower ramp this morning. No one died." His jaw worked once. "But no hauling means no wages, and no wages means—" He let the sentence end. Rowan had come to the door behind her. "Who is hurt?" The porter glanced at him, then back to Stella as if uncertain whose permission governed this stare. "Harlan Pike, Joseph Mead, the Ketter brothers. Mr. Dace says he will make up what he can." "What he can," Rowan repeated. The porter swallowed. "Yes, sir." Rowan's face did not change, but Stella felt him become very still in the way he did when calculating quickly. "Tell Dace I will call in the morning." The porter nodded, relief and embarrassment crossing his features in the same breath. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." He touched his cap to Stella. "And thank you, ma'am." The wrapping kept. After he had gone, she shut the door and set the folded linen by the basin. Rowan stood with one hand on the chair back, gaze lowered to the floorboards. "You are already paying them," she said. It was not a question. His eyes lifted to hers. "Enough to keep bread on their tables until they can stand." "From what account?" "Mine." She looked at the one good coat drying near the stove, the cuffs she had watched him mend, the careful measurements in their ledger where coal and tea were argued down to 6pence. "You do not have an account for 4 idle households." "I have one now." She waited for elaboration. It did not come. He reached for the kettle, then stopped when she spoke again. "Did my mother's clerk come to your office?" A small pause. "Yes." "Did he instruct your employers not to advance you?" "Yes." The room seemed to narrow by an inch, not enough to change its shape, enough to alter its air. "You did not mention it. You had Clegg and rent to settle. I had this." She nodded once. Facts, then. He was being squeezed from her side and from his own, and still he had found coin for men who could not climb a ramp without falling. She turned back to the ledger because standing still would become anger, and anger would cost precision. She wrote another line she did not want to write. Coal postponed again. By Monday the damp had entered the walls and stayed there. Lessons ran long, sewing ran later, and Rowan left before dawn with dry bread in his pocket, and came back after dark, with river grit on his boots and a new quiet around his mouth. He continued to set aside small packets at the edge of the table, 2 shillings wrapped in paper, 4 shillings tied with string, each one marked with a name in his spare hand. Pike, Mead, Ketter. Stella did not ask how much remained in whatever account he called his. She began to know by omission. The tea tin was not replaced. The butcher's parcel was lighter than usual. The watchcloth in his trunk lay empty one evening when she put away laundered shirts, and full again the next morning, as if he had considered one bargain and reversed it before dawn. 3 days passed before she found the folded bill tucked inside his coat pocket, forgotten there when she turned the collar for brushing. It was from Harker and Sons Provisioners, marked denied in red ink with a note beneath. Instruction from Hayes and Penlow. No extension to Mr. Rowan Vale or household. She held the paper between finger and thumb until the red letters steadied. Then she folded it exactly as she had found it and returned it to the pocket. That afternoon she went to the trunk at the foot of the bed, lifted the winter woolens, and took out the small velvet pouch she had not opened in 2 years. Inside lay her father's bangles, thin chased gold with a faint floral pattern worn smooth where wrist and desk had met over time. He had given them on her 20th birthday with an awkward flourish and a joke about legal daughters needing legal weight at their cuffs. They were the last gift of his she had kept in usable form. She put them on once, briefly, to feel their familiar cool circle around bone. Then she took them off, wrapped them in muslin, and tucked the bundle beneath her plain shawl. She did not tell Rowan where she was going. She left a note on the table in one line. Mrs. Peel's Lane. Back by dusk. The jeweller in Wren Court was the sort of man who bought memories by the ounce and did not ask names if cash was requested. He examined the bangles under window light, weighed them twice, named a number too low, and waited for her to argue. She did not. "In coin," she said. He counted sovereigns onto black cloth, then added silver to make the odd amount. When he pushed the pile forward, she separated £3 and slid that portion back. "Receipt for this amount," she said. "No family names, only sold goods, paid in full." His brows rose, then lowered. "As you wish." She took the receipt, the remaining coin, and the emptiness where the bangles had been. From Wren Court she walked to the key offices where Mr. Dace kept his books, in a room that smelled of ink, damp rope, and boiled cabbage from the kitchen below. Dace himself looked up from a ledger with his spectacles low on his nose and disbelief in his face when he saw her. "Mrs. Vale, have you lost your way?" "No." She set the wrapped coin on his desk. "This is for Pike, Mead, and the Ketter brothers. Wages at half rate for 2 weeks. Paid through your hand. Entered in your book." Dace did not touch the packet. "Madam, I cannot accept charity on another man's account." "This is not charity." Her voice stayed level, This is labor interrupted by injury. They would have earned it standing. He looked past her shoulder, perhaps expecting Rowan to appear and settle the propriety. Your husband has already covered. He has covered enough. She pushed the packet an inch closer. Take it. Dace hesitated, then untied the string and counted quickly. His eyes widened despite himself. Mrs. Vale, this is more than half wages. Then include medicine and boot repairs. From what source am I to record it? She handed him the receipt from Wren Court, folded to hide the jeweller's name. Private sale. Household disbursement. He read, then looked at her again, this time with a kind of rough respect that held no pity. You understand that once entered, this cannot be undone. That is the purpose of entries. He opened his ledger, drew a line, and wrote the men's names in a column she could see from where she stood. Paid, he marked beside each one. He sanded the ink and blew it clear. When she stepped back into the lane, the light had gone thin and amber. Across from the office, beside a dark carriage partly hidden by stacked crates, the broad-shouldered steward from St. Jude's stood with one foot on the curb, hat brim low. He was not looking at the warehouses. He was looking at her. She met his gaze directly. He inclined his head in precise household courtesy, then turned, opened the carriage door, and spoke to someone within too softly for words to carry. The door closed. The carriage did not move until she had gone half the length of the lane. By the first Thursday of November, invitations for winter engagements had begun arriving in Mayfair, and one came up the Cooper's stairs addressed in Beatrice Hayes's hand. Heavy card. Cream ribbon. The betrothal supper of Miss Eleanor Hayes and Mr. Frederick Linton to be held at Hayes' house on Saturday next. Family expected. Stella read it once and placed it beside the ledger. Rowan was repairing the lamp wick. Will you go? It is not an invitation, she said. It is a stage direction. Then refuse it. She will say refusal proves my shame. And attendance proves what? That I can still stand in her rooms and remain upright. She touched the card with 2 fingers, then withdrew her hand. I will go. Saturday evening returned her to marble underfoot and candlelight caught in mirrored walls she had once crossed without thought. Hayes' house had not altered. The front hall still smelled faintly of beeswax and orange peel. The portrait of her father still faced the window instead of the room. The servants were mostly new. Those who remembered her lowered their eyes too quickly, caught between habit and instruction. She entered in her plain dove-grey silk, mended at the inner hem where no one could see, and a single jet pin at the throat. Rowan came beside her in a dark coat, cut too cleanly for chance, and too old in cloth to satisfy Mayfair standards. He looked, as always, exactly like himself, and no one else. Eleanor hurried forward first, cheeks flushed with bridal strain and relief. Stella, you came. I said I would. Eleanor's grip tightened briefly on her hand. Thank you. Before Stella could answer, Beatrice approached with that unhurried precision she gave to all public performances. Pearl grey again, as if colour itself obeyed her. Her eyes moved over Stella's dress, gloves, hair, and settled with cool appraisal. Stella, she said. No embrace, no kiss. You have kept your talent for entrances. I was announced by your butler, mother. Were you? Beatrice turned to Rowan. Mr. Vale, London has many persistent men. Few persist in error this elegantly. Rowan inclined his head. Mrs. Hayes. Dinner unfolded beneath crystal and silver, while conversation moved around trade routes, wedding linens, horses, and advantageous weather. Stella sat midway down the table where she could hear both her mother and the women whispering 2 seats farther, who spoke of her as if she had mislaid not comfort, but rank. She answered what was asked, declined what was implied, and kept her hands steady on cutlery she had learned to use before she could write her name. Between fish and roast, Beatrice lifted her glass and let the room quiet by force of expectation alone. "To Eleanor," she said, voice smooth as polished stone, who has understood that security is not vulgar when one has sense enough to choose it. A few polite laughs. Eleanor's smile trembled and held. Beatrice's gaze shifted to Stella with surgical gentleness. "You chose hunger, Stella. Do not confuse stubbornness with honor." The words landed without heat, and perhaps because there was no heat, they struck harder. Stella felt the pulse jump in her throat and then in her wrists, a clean double beat against skin. She set down her fork before her hand could tighten around it and took one sip of water. "As you wish, Mother," she said. 4 words. The room breathed again around them, relieved to have witnessed cruelty without requiring response. After supper, the ladies withdrew. Stella did not follow at once. A footman with uncertain posture approached carrying a tray of cordials meant for the gentleman in the library. "Mrs. Vale, if you please. Mr. Barnes has been called downstairs." She took the tray from him before he could apologize further. "I know the way." The corridor to the library seemed narrower than memory, lined with the same landscapes in gilt frames, the same runner carpet that muffled steps and confession alike. Light from the library spilled through a half-closed door in a bright wedge across the floorboards. She reached for the handle, then stopped at the sound of a voice she did not recognize, older and dry with restrained impatience. "Your Grace, the masquerade has served its term. If you do not resume your seat this week, the trustees will move without you." The tray's silver edge pressed into her palm through the napkin. Her fingers went cold so quickly she could feel each one separately. A second voice, Rowan's lower than usual and stripped of public softness. "They will not move. They already have drafts prepared." "Then burn the drafts." A short silence. The older man again, quieter. "And Mrs. Vale?" Stella did not hear the first inhale he took, only the answer. "She will hear it from me." She stood in the corridor with crystal glasses chiming faintly against one another, from the tremor she had not permitted anywhere else. The house seemed suddenly too bright, each candle flame sharpened, each painted face on the walls turned toward her with old, incurious eyes. She set the tray down on the nearest side table, one glass at a time until the chiming stopped, straightened the napkin, and adjusted the cuff at her wrist, as though that had been her purpose all along. When she lifted her hand to the library door again, her voice was steady enough to belong to any well-bred daughter in any well-run house. "Cordials," she said, and pushed the door open. The grey-haired gentleman stood with one hand on the mantel, shoulders still military despite age, his profile cut sharp by firelight. Rowan was beside the writing table, coat dark against the panelled wall, expression composed to the point of austerity. For one fractional beat, no one moved. Then the older man stepped back and bowed too quickly. "Mrs. Vale." Rowan crossed to take the tray before she could set it down herself. "Thank you." His voice was even. It gave her nothing to hold. She placed the glasses on the sideboard one by one, felt the tiny chill of crystal against her fingertips, and kept her gaze on the practical work of pouring. The older man did not meet her eyes again. "Mr. Penlow," she said at last, because recognition had arrived with the turn of his head and the line of his mouth. "I'd thought you retired." "I return when called," he answered. The sentence was harmless. The silence after it was not. Rowan set one filled glass near Penlow's hand and one near his own, though neither man drank. In the corridor outside, a footman laughed at something far away. then caught himself and fell quiet. The library fire clicked as resin in the wood gave way. Stella straightened the napkin edge on the tray. "Mrs. Hayes will ask why service is delayed." Rowan looked at her then, fully, eyes dark and unreadable. "Do not remain standing for me." "I had not intended to." She lifted the tray and left without haste, closing the door gently behind her. The latch gave a soft, final sound that seemed louder than it should have been. In the drawing room, Eleanor sat between two aunts who discussed bridal lace, as if thread could mend every bargain ever made by mothers. Beatrice stood near the pianoforte, receiving compliments in her calm, incurious way, each phrase accepted and set aside like correspondence. When Stella entered, Beatrice's gaze moved once over her face. "You are pale," her mother said. "The room is warm," Stella replied. Beatrice's mouth did not change. "You have always mistaken endurance for distinction." Stella took a seat beside the window and folded her hands over each other until the pulse in her fingers steadied. She did not look toward the corridor again. She did not need to. The words remained where they had landed. "Your grace" served its term. She will hear it from me, not rumor, not gossip carried by servants. A fact spoken in the plain language of men who believed themselves unobserved. What Beatrice did not know, what she would discover far too late, was that Stella had already begun to move. The leave-taking came at last in a rustle of silk and formula. Coats were fetched, names exchanged, promises made for fittings and breakfasts and church flowers. Rowan appeared at her side in the front hall with her cloak over his arm and held it while she slipped her hands into the sleeves. His fingers brushed the clasp once and withdrew. "Home?" he asked. "Yes." No carriage had been offered. They walked. Mayfair after midnight sounded hollow. Carriage wheels distant, night watch calling the hour at intervals that seemed too regular for human breath. Rowan kept half a pace beside her, not touching. His stride adjusted to hers without acknowledgement. At a crossing where the paving dipped, he put one hand lightly at her elbow to steady her over slick stone, then removed it at once. At their stair, he gave her the key and waited while she turned it. Once, twice. The lock caught and yielded. They entered the narrow rooms above the cooper's yard where darkness smelled of cooling ash and old wood. Rowan lit the lamp, trimmed the wick, and set the flame low. "You should sleep." "I have work at first light." "So do I." He removed his coat, folded it over the chair, and began unbuttoning his cuffs with the same unhurried precision he used every night. Stella unpinned her hat and set it on the trunk. She could feel him waiting for a question that did not come. "Stella," he said quietly. She turned. "I intended... not tonight." Her voice was level, almost gentle. "I am very tired." He held her gaze for a long second, then inclined his head once. "Very well." He lay down fully clothed except for his boots and was still within minutes, or seemed to be. Stella sat at the table until the lamp burned lower, hands flat on either side of the ledger, eyes fixed on the page where Cobbler, half-share, had dried 2 evenings before. Her wedding ring, plain gold, worn thin at one edge, warmed under her thumb as she turned it once around her finger, then again. An hour before the cooper's first hammer usually struck. She rose. She did not wake him. She took the carpet bag from beneath the bed and packed what she had packed 2 years earlier, and no more. 3 dresses, 1 plain wool shawl, stockings wrapped in newspaper, her father's penknife, the blue ribbon packet of trust copies, the stack of Beatrice's monthly notes, the denied account slips from Clegg and Harker, the jeweller's receipt with the name folded under. She added her teaching references and the letter from Mrs. Brewer praising her instruction in a hand splattered by haste. On top, she placed a clean collar and a small loaf saved from yesterday. Then she removed the ring from her finger. For a moment she held it in her palm and saw, not romance, not rescue, but 2 years of shared ledgers, repaired locks, half coins returned under a brass thimble, and an umbrella angled to keep rain from her shoulder. Her hand closed, opened. She set the ring on the ledger's center crease, where both of them would see it, and neither could pretend it had been misplaced. She took up her gloves, her bag, and left. The lane was slate grey and empty except for milk carts beginning their rounds. At Hayes and Penlow, the outer door was being unbarred by a clerk with sleepy eyes and ink on his cuff. He straightened when he recognized her and then seemed to remember, too late, how she was expected to be treated. "Mrs. Vale, we are not yet receiving callers." "You are now," she said, and stepped inside. The waiting room smelled of damp wool and sealing wax. Framed maps of estate boundaries lined the walls, red lines and black lines deciding which families ate and which waited. Edwin Maris emerged from an inner office, buttoning his waistcoat, surprise hardening quickly into professional reserve. "Mrs. Vale," he said, making her married name sound like an administrative inconvenience. "If this concerns your mother's previous communications, I am instructed to advise that terms remain unchanged." "This does not concern terms." Stella placed her carpetbag by the chair, untied the blue ribbon packet, and laid the papers in a neat stack on his desk. "I am filing 2 requests. First, letters of character and referral for a governess post in York, to be transmitted this week. Second, a formal petition to review the administration of my father's trust, including disbursement records and guardian conduct over the last 8 years. Maris blinked once, then twice, as if the words were in a dialect he did not expect from her. "You understand what you are saying." "I do. A challenge of this kind is a public instrument." "Yes." "It will be read as repudiation of your mother's household." "Yes." He put 2 fingers on the top page and did not yet read it. "And of your husband's." That landed where it was meant to. Stella kept her voice even. "Please mark the filing." Maris glanced toward the inner door. "Mr. Penlow is in conference. Then he may review after entry." He hesitated long enough to make his refusal visible, then rang for a junior clerk. "Register this petition. Copy all attachments. Witness signatures required." The junior clerk, freckled and barely 20, looked from Maris to Stella and back again before saying, "Yes, sir." He placed the register book on the table and turned it toward her. "Name, madam." She dipped the pen, signed Stella Hayes Vale in a hand that did not waver, and sanded the line herself. The clerk blotted, folded, and carried the papers inside. While she waited, she drafted a short letter requesting the York position formally and enclosed Mrs. Brewer's reference. No flourish, no plea. Qualifications, dates, availability. She sealed it with plain wax and handed it across the desk. Maris accepted the sealed letter between 2 fingers. "If you proceed, there may be no return to prior arrangements." "There is no prior arrangement," she said. "There is leverage." The office door opened before he could answer. Rowan stood on the threshold in a plain, dark coat and gloves still damp from the street, hair unpowdered, face set in that calm she now recognized as discipline, not passivity. Behind him, Mr. Penlow remained in shadow, watching. Maris stepped back at once. "Sir." Rowan did not acknowledge the title, only crossed the room to where Stella stood by her bag and the register book. He removed one glove, reached into his coat, and placed a heavy signet ring on the desk between them. The crest cut into the gold was not decorative. It was jurisdiction rendered in metal. His voice, when he spoke, was low and without ornament. "I am Alistair Vale, Duke of Merrow, and I married you because you were the only person in London who treated powerlessness as human, not useful." The room did not move. The fire in the grate gave one small pop and settled. Stella looked at the signet first, then at him, and in a single inward turn, the last 2 years reordered themselves. Porters stepping aside before looking up, colonels halting mid-stride, a steward in a dark carriage watching church steps, waxed cord in a clerk's pocket, rivermen obeying one word as if it had always been his to give. Not broke, concealed, not temporary, deliberate. Her fingers tightened once on the carpetbag handle, then loosened. "How long were you planning to continue?" He met her gaze without flinching. "Until your trust was safe from your mother's hand. Until you could choose with full knowledge and without coercion." "You heard me file." "Yes. And if I had taken the York Post?" "I would have sent your references myself." She absorbed that, the answer as measured as every other thing about him, and felt anger and relief collide so cleanly they almost became clarity. He had lied by omission. He had also stood between her and ruin without asking credit for it. Both were true. The crux sat there, irreducible. Mr. Penlow stepped forward at last, bowing to Stella with a formality he had never offered her as a girl in her mother's drawing room. "Your Grace has authorized full production of trust ledgers to the court. If you wish to withdraw your petition, Mrs. Vale, no entry need proceed beyond this office." Stella turned to the register where her name darkened the page in fresh ink. She placed 2 fingers beside the line. Not on it. "No withdrawal," she said. "File everything." Penlow inclined his head. "As you wish." Rowan looked at her ringless hand, then back to her face. He did not reach for her. "What do you require now?" She lifted her chin a fraction, shoulders squared over one carpetbag and a stack of copied grievances that had finally become action. "Exact accounts," she said, "from everyone." "Then you shall have them." Stella held his gaze a moment longer, then turned to Mr. Maris. "Send copies of every filed page to Mrs. Hayes by messenger before noon. I will not have her claim surprise." Maris looked to Rowan. Alistair now, the name still strange in Stella's thoughts, then back to her. "Yes, Mrs. Vale." "Hayes Vale," she said. "Use both names." She took the ringless hand he had glanced at and placed it flat on the register once more, as if sealing her own instruction by touch. When she reached for the carpetbag, Alistair took it first and set it beside her chair rather than carrying it away. A small courtesy. Not possession. Not yet. As she gathered the loose papers into one stack, Mr. Penlow cleared his throat. "Mrs. Vale, there are matters you were owed explanation for, and I regret that you received them in fragments." "Begin with the steward in the church lane," Stella said. Penlow inclined his head. "Gideon Bram, Merrow's chief steward. He watched because His Grace ordered your safety observed after Mrs. Hayes began interfering with trade accounts." "The colonels?" "Trustees. Retired officers who sit on the Merrow Charitable Board and the Dock Relief Fund." "The mud on his boots after clerking?" For the first time, a faint line touched Penlow's mouth. "Not from an office floor." Alistair spoke before Penlow could continue. "From riverside inspections, tenant disputes, and warehouses that were mine, whether I named them or not." Stella absorbed it without answer. Facts. Exact accounts. Penlow set one hand on the desk. "The hearing is set for Thursday morning in chambers. Mrs. Hayes has already retained counsel." "She has had years to prepare," Stella said. "She may use them." 3 days later, Stella stood in Lincoln's Inn beneath high windows, clouded by old London soot, and watched clerks arrange bundles of paper tied in red tape across a long oak table. Ink, wool, damp stone, the dry rustle of legal parchment. The room smelled like decisions. Beatrice arrived in black silk with pearl earrings, and no visible haste, as if she had come for music rather than judgment. She gave Stella one measured look, expression untouched. "You have chosen spectacle," Beatrice said. "I chose record." Council called the matter. Names were read. The language of property and guardianship moved like machinery, impersonal and relentless. Stella sat beside Penlow and Alistair, her father's blue ribbon packet in front of her, Beatrice's monthly notes stacked beside it in chronological order. Across the table, Beatrice's advocate spoke first, smooth and confident. Mrs. Hayes exercised lawful discretion under a widow's authority. Her daughter left the family home voluntarily, entered an imprudent marriage, and rejected repeated opportunities for reconciliation. Penlow rose slowly. Discretion is not diversion. He presented the notes one by one. Return home, apologize, and the allowance resumes. Same hand, same command, same condition. Then he opened ledgers from Hayes Holdings and Merrow auditors side by side. Columns lined up. Transfers marked as school repairs, then routed to private investment accounts held under Beatrice's signature. Charitable trusts delayed. Stella's disbursements reduced below contractual minimum, while substantial sums moved elsewhere. Beatrice's counsel objected, then objected again. The master overruled twice. When Mr. Clegg was called, he removed his hat with both hands and testified in a voice made rough by nerves that he had received direct instruction not to extend household credit to Stella's address, under implied threat of legal pressure. Harker's denied slip was entered and read aloud. Mr. Dace appeared next, shoulders still broad, and confirmed that wages for injured dock workers had been sustained, partly by anonymous household disbursement from Mrs. Vale, while other channels were being constrained. Stella watched Beatrice through all of it. Her mother did not fidget, did not whisper, did not plead. Only once did her fingers tighten on her reticule when the Merrow forensic ledger was read into record and the diverted total stated in full. It was a number large enough to fund 2 schools for a decade. The master folded his hands. "Mrs. Hayes, do you dispute these entries bear your authorization?" Beatrice's voice stayed level. "I dispute the interpretation." "Not the signature." A pause. "No." The ruling came in precise terms. Administration of the Hayes Trust removed from Beatrice Hayes and vested under court supervision with immediate effect. Arrears due to Stella Hayes Vale to be paid and recorded. Hayes' educational property and associated schoolroom rights restored to Stella's governance under independent audit. Beatrice granted a court-limited personal allowance pending final settlement and barred from discretionary control of trust principal. Costs assessed accordingly. The words were dry. Their consequence was not. When counsel began gathering papers, Beatrice stood before anyone could offer her arm. She looked at Stella as if examining an unfamiliar portrait. "You were always obstinate," she said. Stella met her eyes. "I was always exact." Beatrice's mouth flattened by a fraction. She turned and left with her advocate, pearl earrings steady, back perfectly straight. She did not look back. In the corridor, voices shifted when Alistair emerged beside Stella, a ripple of titled recognition moving through clerks and solicitors who had greeted Rowan Vale with polite neglect for 2 years. Men who had once spoken over Stella now stepped aside and addressed her directly. "Mrs. Hayes Vale." "Madam." "Your copy, if you please." She accepted the sealed court extract, checked the wax, and placed it in her carpet bag with the same care she had given bread money and lamp figures. Mr. Clegg bowed awkwardly from near the stair. "Mrs. Vale." "Mrs. Hayes Vale, I mean—" I wish to say, "You said enough in there," she answered, and accurately. His shoulders eased, gratitude plain and wordless. By the second week of November, the Hayes schoolroom had been aired, scrubbed, and opened under her key. The first morning she entered alone, she stood in the doorway and let the old space meet her. Chalk dust, polished oak, the faint scent of lavender soap from freshly washed floors. Shelves once decorative now held actual copybooks. The long table was cleared of ornamental vases and lined with slates. Light fell across the window she had looked toward as a girl when she wanted to breathe. At her waist hung a ring of brass keys that clicked softly when she moved. She wore plain working sleeves pinned above the wrist, ink already on one finger. Two neighborhood girls waited outside with their aunt, uncertain whether this restored room was truly meant for them. Stella opened the door wider. "You are early," she said. "Good. We begin early here." They came in. Before noon, Mr. Dace arrived with his cap in hand and a folded account. "Pike and Mead are back on light work. Ketter Brothers full shift by Monday. I brought the wage ledger you asked to review." She scanned the entries, found the line marked private disbursement from her earlier payment, and added a notation in the margin. Reimbursed by restored trust. Docket enclosed. Exact closure. Nothing left hanging. "Thank you, Mr. Dace." He nodded once, rough respect unchanged. "Your mother's people sent a man to ask questions yesterday. And I gave him the court number and shut the door." "Good." Later that afternoon, Gideon Bram appeared with a wrapped parcel and bowed in that impeccable household manner she had seen from the carriage lane. "Mrs. Hayes Vale, His Grace requested this be delivered without announcement. I judged that discourteous." She took the parcel, unwrapped muslin, and found the gold bangles, her father's bangles, floral pattern worn smooth at the same points where her wrists had once rested on copybooks. She looked up sharply. "From Wren Court?" "Yes, madam. Purchased at fair premium. Receipt enclosed." Inside the packet lay the jeweller's new receipt, paid in full with transfer notation. Physical proof returned, accounted for, closed. "Thank you, Mr. Bram," she said. He hesitated, then added, "For what it is worth, madam, I was told to watch for danger, not to report your private grief. There were matters I never repeated." She studied him, then inclined her head. "Noted." When he had gone, she placed the bangles in the schoolroom drawer where she kept her father's penknife and the court extract, then locked it and slid the key onto her ring. Near dusk, after the last child had been collected and the slates stacked, Stella stood at the long table reviewing next week's lesson allocations when she felt someone at the doorway. Alistair did not enter. He waited with one hand on the frame, coat dark against the hall light, as if the room was hers to grant or withhold. His eyes were steady. "May I come in?" She set down her pen. "You may." He stepped inside 2 paces and stopped again. In his open palm lay her plain wedding ring. "You left this on the ledger," he said. "I did not presume." The quiet between them held all that had been done and concealed and repaired. She crossed to him without hurry, keys at her waist giving a small metallic note with each step. When she reached him, she did not take the ring immediately. "I will not live inside half-truths again," she said. "You will not," he answered. "No disguises, no withheld names, no withheld accounts. Even when truth costs you. Especially then." "One account remains," she said. "St. Jude's that first night. Were you there by design?" "No, I was there on dock relief duty and parish counts. Meeting you at that door was chance. Staying after was choice." She took the ring from his palm and turned it once between finger and thumb, feeling the worn edge. Then she held out her other hand. He understood, and with careful fingers he slid the ring back onto her hand, not as reclamation, as consent, renewed in plain sight. She looked up at him. "You may stand beside me, Alistair. Not in front, not behind." A rare smile touched his mouth and changed his face from guarded to open. The expression she had seen only in fragments now offered whole. "Beside you, Stella." Outside, the corridor lamps were being lit, one by one. Inside the restored schoolroom, she moved past him to close the ledger for the day, then returned and offered him her hand. And together, they stepped into the hall, while the keys at her waist marked a rhythm that finally belonged to her.